Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio / dining room from in and around Appalachia. We'll be your pilot and navigator for this shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And joining me here tonight is my dude, Dan Dean, a.k.a. The Wood Butcher. Dan, we were just talking about that here before we started. How is it that you came about the pretty awesome nickname as the Wood Butcher?
It's not an exclusive name for me. It's just kind of a moniker given to most carpenters who will do whatever is necessary to get that wood to fit where they need it to go.
Nice. I like the nickname. It's got a good backstory to it. Yeah, but you should really consider adopting that into your stand-up comedy life, whereas the stand-up comedian world knows you as the Wood Butcher.
It might sell some tickets.
You got the lumberjack beard going already. Folks are already going to associate you with with lumber.
I mean, they already associate me with wood, so
there you go. You can sport a flannel. Pull off the whole lumberjack style.
Yeah, kind of, let's just go ahead and segue that right into what we're talking about today, just like that 90s grunge scene from Seattle.
Yep, that's correct. We're going to go into a journey into what I like to call smells like Laurel Canyon. And that's one dude's inquisition, as I like to describe it. It's my series looking at the grunge counterculture and relative comparison to a book by a fellow named Dave McGowan called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, inside the canyon, about Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills, relative to that's where the hippie counterculture grew out of and was kind of incubated. And
I should really
identified. What's that?
I said I should really probably read that book.
It's a great read. I mean, when I initially discovered it, I was a fan of rock music, just generally speaking. I mean, the 60s weren't exactly my scene, but I appreciate some of the Stones, the Beatles. I guess at one point in time, maybe the Beach Boys, or some of these larger acts out of the Laurel Canyon scene. And after reading that book, I mean, it just changed my whole perspective on psychological operations in general, but specifically relative to the rock and roll and Hollywood scene, because there was actors associated with all these musical acts in Laurel Canyon that, like, for example, for the most part, served as a PR sort of marketing wing of the operation. So yeah, I highly recommend anyone to read that book for sure if you have any interest in the essentially the birth of rock and roll, right? I mean, before that.
I've heard you talk about it. I've heard a couple other people mention it here and there. It seems like something I should read to get myself in the know what everybody's talking
about. Starting to sound like a Billy Joel song. Everyone's talking about still rock and roll to me.
I do enjoy some Billy Joel.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the man's talented. He can't really claim otherwise with Piano Man, right? I mean, that's pretty legendary kind of
I love Piano Man. We didn't start the fire. That seems
we didn't start
right
the fire.
Up your alley.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. It's definitely conspiracy theory ridden, isn't it? So, relative to the weird scenes inside the canyon, I took sort of the framework that McGowan built in that storyline as far as posing the question: is it really an organic action or activity if this music scene grew up around the artist moved there essentially before the music scene, and it had all these specific characteristics. The early musicians often were not good musicians, or that's clearly not why they were not earning this position on merit, not earning record contracts immediately on merit. They're all from military families, largely military intelligence or civilian intelligence families, CIA, OSS being examples of those civilian agencies. And they often had quote unquote blue blood heritage, if you will, the folks, for example, one of the folks we're going to be talking about here tonight, John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas, using him as kind of a comparison point to Dave Grohl in the grunge scene, because both characters are very integral. They have a lot of, they're connected to a lot of aspects of both countercultural scenes. And I think the connections they have with the families they come from and their associated activities, I think that's indicative of what is going on a larger scale. They're just perhaps the most egregious perpetrators of these activities, But yeah, John Phillips, for example, married a direct descendant of John Adams, Susie Adams. Was his first wife. So, he's, these are the type of families that compose these scenes. And looking at the scene from Laurel Canyon and how it unfolded, and again, where these folks came from with their families and the activities that were engaged in. And again, a lot of times it wasn't even the bands you're hearing. There's a whole other aspect of, studio musicians playing a lot of these things. I think all of these characteristics roll over into the grunge scene. In fact, that studio musicians that did the recordings for a lot of the major hits, like the Mamas and the Papas or the Beach Boys, they were known as the Wrecking Crew. There's actually an individual who's the child of one of the Wrecking Crew that's on the studio musicians for the grunge scene. So there's direct connections across both scenes, 30 years apart. So that's really what I'm posing here is my Smells Like Laurel Canyon series, Dan, is it's my one dude's inquisition to whether or not this was an organic countercultural scene, whereas I just described a very inorganic countercultural scene developed by military and intelligence agencies with hand-picked folks from certain families in which to perpetrate these things in a total psyop thing, because these things are used, as well as I'll discuss here tonight, these things are used for marketing purposes. You and I were both teenagers in the 90s, so I don't know if you remember MTV's big Rock the Vote, right? That was a big getting the youth out to vote, if you recall, right? That was, I looking back now, I'm like, well, that's clearly propaganda, right?
Well, it is probably
it could potentially be described or perceived as propaganda using these rock bands, right, on the MTV network, right?
It's positive propaganda, it's just encouraging you to go.
Well, I suppose that's who they're trying to get you to get out and vote for, because it's used today, for example, like
rock your vote isn't inherently propagandist, but yeah, if they are trying to push one way or the other, which I'm sure they were.
Absolutely. Look at it, like in our modern election cycle here in 2024, here in Meme World 2024. I recall just not that long ago, Taylor Swift's opinion about who should be president was a big piece of news being perpetrated across the media, propaganda-wise. And it's the same kind of thing. She's the newest generation or evolution of this rock the vote, right? Which if you recall the 96 film Black Sheep, starring Chris Farley and David Spade.
Chris Farley, yeah.
Great movie. I watched it not that long ago. It's still, in my opinion, still holds, still got some comedic value to it. Isn't outdated and unwatchable by any stretch of the imagination.
I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
Well, it's one of my favorite cameos by Gary Busey. Or cameos generally with Gary Busey popping in there, because that's how I picture Gary Busey, like the way he acts in that film. Like that's just actual Busey.
Yeah,
they just caught him on, and they caught him on a good day, in my opinion, in that thing.
He accidentally, he wasn't even supposed to be in the movie. He just wandered onto the set,
right. And threatened to start a fire in David Spade's mom's underwear.
Yeah,
wasn't that his line? Yeah, have you seen him recently? He's really lost his shit, and like that's saying something for Busey.
Yeah, he is.
He's out there.
He's headed down a dark path, if you will.
It's been a long journey on that dark path, but it's coming to a hill for that man. He's not doing well by the looks of him.
Right.
I know he got in a motorcycle accident years ago, but that one eye is getting real wonky.
Yeah, kind of went a different direction after he bumped his head on a motorcycle.
Oh yeah, not necessarily a bad direction, but yeah, definitely different. Definitely different. Yeah, the nice. Got some Elder Reno here. Nice. So yeah, well, let's not veer off too far down the, because I could talk. One of my favorite instances of reality television is the television program Life with Busey. So I could talk about Gary Busey all day. I mean, the mere fact that they got a TV show or they got some kid to sign away his rights to make decisions to Gary Busey post motorcycle accident. I mean, that's some of the best TV imaginable, in my opinion.
Right.
The execution of that plan was, what's that?
I actually did just watch Point Break not too long
The
ago.
original.
Yeah.
That still plays. That's still a good one, even with Keanu in it.
I like Keanu.
Oh yeah.
You can't complain about John Wick.
Isn't he basically playing the same part he later plays in that film with The Replacements? He's like the former Ohio State quarterback.
You know, I think it is. I think it's the same.
Right? It's like a carryover of the same character.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, there's some movies I obviously like, Bill and Ted. I can't, but anyway, I could talk film and Busey and my his likes and dislikes of Keanu Reeves films, because again, there's a few of them I enjoy, but Point Break, yeah, that's definitely a good one. So back to the Smells Like Laurel Canyon series. So evaluating the characteristics from Dave McGowan's book, applying that to the Seattle grunge counterculture. In my opinion, that they're identical, right? These are the same kind of scenes, the same exact framework, 30 years apart, and these countercultures are used, obviously, as social engineering to generate these different psychological operations on folks. It's not just one psychological operation. Rock the Vote would be one example, I think, of that. But there's obviously more, more operations being run, etc. These characters, they pop up. Eddie Vedder pops up, lead singer of Pearl Jam. He pops up in anti-gun propaganda ads out of Hollywood and these sort of things.
Who did pop up in anti-gun propaganda? Kurt Cobain.
He was very pro-gun, huh? He was very pro-gun stance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, we're going to be using one of his bandmates, Dave Grohl, as kind of the centerpiece there of the grunge scene. So he's an interesting character all around. But yeah, I think it's funny though, with the way the cyclical nature of things, because I feel like in the 90s, the hippie kind of fashion, or kind of went along with grunge. Like I feel like at least when I went to high school in Cincinnati, Ohio, there, we had a pretty rural high school, not as rural as yours, but the there was definitely a grunge element. I commonly 20 years ago, I've been talking about Pearl Jam and grunge, in 1994, wearing a flannel shirt, and here it is 2024, and I'm talking about grunge and Pearl Jam and whatnot. But I see the fashion trends also coming back, because at the time I feel like there was a contingent of folks that were hippie. It was like a hippie fashion trend that went along in the 90s, kind of contemporary to the grunge scene, right?
Don't forget, I also live 5 miles from Yellow Springs, so
that's a great example of the hippie scene.
With
yeah. So that kind of was really, I feel like that was really big, kind of contemporary to grunge in the 90s, just at least the fashion trends. And I probably, to a certain degree, some of the music with movies like Forrest Gump that revived a lot of that stuff, a lot of the 60s, music on that soundtrack and whatnot. And today I see the 90s kind of grunge fashion coming back, right? Like I see, the younger generations, Gen Zers and whatnot wearing
Nirvana shirts.
Oh, Nirvana shirts, big time, right? The smiley face one, which just sets off all the the Kill Bill sirens in my brain hole regarding my conspiracy theories surrounding the smiley face symbols and whatnot.
Every once in a while, if I see a young kid like that wearing a Nirvana shirt, I'll ask what their favorite Nirvana song is. they never know one.
Yep.
They never give me a Nirvana song.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure to a certain degree some of the music's kind of cycling back, but definitely the fashion seems to be. Right. Flannels, the Nirvana shirt, definitely the smiley face one. In fact, I saw a photo on the Twixter the other day with Ben Affleck. Some ordered some fast food or something, some nonsense. I'm like, why is this a thing, right? But he's wearing the Nirvana smiley face shirt. I'm like, oh, great, here we go. It literally is everywhere. It's not just the younger generations. It is the Gen Xers and whatnot. These fashion trends are coming back from the grunge scene. So I think that to a certain extent that speaks to the level of psychological operations that have been perpetrated on the mass public. Because I wore flannels before grunge. I'm gonna wear flannels long after grunge. You know what I mean?
Really?
But I did used to have an extensive collection of Pearl Jam T-shirts. So, and I was such an enormous Pearl Jam fan that I once drove 12 hours to see a concert, only to drive in Seattle. Was the first time they played in like 4 or 5 years. Then drove 12 hours back to Montana, only to report just on time for nuclear security duty. So I was a big Pearl Jam fan for sure.
Oh, yeah.
No question about that. But yeah, so but I do see some of these trends, and again, I'm sure some of the music to a certain extent is getting some revival, and whatnot. But I think just the fashion trend in and of itself kind of sticks in my mind as being a major, kind of just a point where that's really impacted society, right? Even 30 years later, folks are still, redoing these fashion trends. It's, to me,
that's not specifically
speaks to the effectiveness. Sure.
That comes around with just about every fashion trend. I feel
that's
like
true. Fashion is pretty cyclical like that, but
God damn it.
I do think a lot of fashion does get disseminated. The trends start, and the inception of these trends begin with not just the grunge scene, but musical acts in general, and obviously movie stars, which again is a component of the grunge scene and the weird scenes inside the canyon, right? We got a nuclear security comment. That's correct. Most of the time,
Yeah.
bored for 12 hours, carry a gun doing it.
There's no place you were more bored.
Exactly. Yeah, you learn how to play a lot of board games and watch TV, and you stay occupied with your time.
Yeah.
Nice. So I think so speaking to the trends, there's the movie scene, right? So the Young Turks were part of the weird scene, the Laurel Canyon scene in the 60s. We're talking folks like Dennis Hopper, Jack Nicholson, Peter Fonda, right? Peter Fonda's daughter was one of the major figures in the Hollywood scene pushing the grunge counterculture in a film, if you recall, by Cameron Crowe, Singles.
Bridget.
Matt Dillon, Bridget Fonda. Remember that one?
Yeah.
That was a pretty big, I mean, Pearl Jam even not co-starred, but they had appearances in the film as Matt Dillon's band. They were playing Matt Dillon's character's band in the film. So that was the same kind of crossover scene in the 60s, right? Between the Young Turks of the 60s, Laurel Canyon hippie scene, and the musicians. That was the same kind of crossover, right? With the Pearl Jam and the Matt Dillon's character being part of the grunge scene. And again, you have a Young Turk, Peter Fonda's daughter, Bridget Fonda, actually, bridging the gap there between the two countercultures. So, from the Wrecking Crew, the studio musicians from the 60s, and one of their offsprings in the 90s version, to the Hollywood scene. So these scenes are, very intimately connected on a number of factors. And again, these are all frameworks identified by Dave McGowan. So I can't take really credit for identifying those things, but I do find it interesting that, taking the framework that he realized and discovered in his book, and it's just that really boggled my mind, because the inception of this series, Smells Like Laurel Canyon, was listening to a podcast by with an interview with Dave McGowan. This is easily 10 years ago, 9 years ago, and he said, and the interviewer asked him, "Well, have you ever thought about applying the same framework from your book to these other music scenes?" And he basically just said, well, he did. He was so interested in this one because it was his favorite music scene, right? He grew up on the 60s counterculture, even though I think he was a teenager in the 70s. So this is that was kind of like how I felt too. So like I grew up on the grunge scene, right? Like that was the scene I was most interested in. So, I heard him say that. I'm like, well, I could take this. I really enjoyed this book, and I can take this framework and apply it here. And And it really boggled my mind, even though it was obviously something I was looking for, right? I was interested in finding out whether or not these principles and factors were present in the grunge countercultural scene. I really didn't expect, you know what I mean? Like, it really blew my mind that these different countercultural scenes that had such great impact on society, 30 years apart from one another, were so connected.
So let's back up for a second here. You were talking about Bridget Fonda, you know, daughter of Young Turk or whatever. So later on down the road in her career, she just fell off the map. She just disappeared,
Yeah,
went into hiding, and nobody heard from her for like 20 years, something like that.
big
Do you
time.
think that had anything to do with other factors? You
I
know,
do, absolutely. Yeah.
maybe she was pushed out of that scene.
I think it has everything to do with some sort of military intelligence operation style psyop situations. I mean, even being a part of these things, even getting signed up for the program, if you will, that's going to have a psychological impact on somebody like that. And Bridget Fonda looks like she ate the old Bridget Fonda a couple times over. That's how big this lady's gotten. So I have to imagine she's gone through some psychological situations to put on that kind of weight.
Right, right. Yeah, she's not the same person for sure that she was last time she was in the public eye.
She's about 3 times the person she was last.
Yeah, and you know, her take is that she started caring more about the way she felt than the way she looked. But I think your take is that, you know, psychologically she went through some shit and it affected her in a negative way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that's my position. And looking at an individual, I don't think, for example, an individual from the '60s Laurel Canyon countercultural scene, Jim Morrison, I don't think Jim Morrison died. I think he went through some shit and somehow got into a new program because he looks identical to Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, you've mentioned this to me before. Yeah,
from their appearance. There's actually a clip of Rush Limbaugh singing a Doors song, like on the air. It sounds like just like Jim, like in tune with Jim Morrison singing. They both have a gold microphone.
Yeah.
They look identical, you know what I mean? So, but I think, you know, as an individual like Jim Morrison, seeing him put on all that weight, because he put on all that weight as Jim Morrison. One of the last pictures, I used to play a game on Twixter. I'd post from time to time when I get in these conversations with folks about Jim Morrison not dying and whatnot. I would post a picture of Jim Morrison and fat Jim Morrison, like a few months before he died, super orca fat dude. And they say, is this Jim Morrison or young Rush Limbaugh? And, you know, more oftentimes than not, folks are guessing Rush Limbaugh because it does look more like Rush Limbaugh than it did the skinnier version of Jim Morrison. I just think psychologically speaking, he went through a lot, right? Like an individual like that, he, you know, likely, I'm assuming a lot of folks, especially at that young age, don't know what they're getting into. I remember joining the Air Force at 17, right? I had no idea what I was getting into. You know what I mean? Just generally speaking, I'm just saying it's like I couldn't conceptualize even going to basic training, right? Like I don't know if you felt the same way, right? Like, did you have some of those? Yeah. So like you're essentially signing up for a program you have no ability to comprehend, right? And that's just not a basic run of the mill. You're joining the military, you're born to basic training. It's just an whole new thing. So Jim Moore, his father was a Navy admiral, got the U.S. He's actually the guy who was in charge of the fleet of ships that known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which is the precipitating event to getting the U.S. into Vietnam, the Vietnam War. So pretty major geopolitical situation this dude was involved with. So I'm just saying they probably, you know, that's the kind of person that this pattern represents, that these folks are the ones that get the children of an individual like Admiral Morrison is who gets put into these you know, rock star movie star programs, right? And
I would say whether or not Jim Morrison was involved in that program, he went through some psychological shit.
Yeah. He looked rough. I mean, there was actually an interview he did around I'd say around 68. So, you know, the Doors have been a big time for a couple of years by that point. But, you know, not very long. They were still pretty new on the scene, if you will. I mean, the Beach Boys have been around a lot longer, the Byrds, these type of characters. He's doing an interview, and I don't recall which late night show it was off the top of my head, but they ask him basically like, "Oh, how are you dealing with this fame and et cetera, et cetera?" And he basically says like, "Oh, I don't like it. I'd rather, disappear into corporate America." I would argue that's exactly what he did. When he became Rush Limbaugh, he disappeared into corporate America.
If that
He was
argument
still,
was true, I have to wonder on whose gravesite did I pour a beer in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris?
oh, you've been there. Okay. Yep. Well,
Yeah.
I forgot you do a bunch of French stuff.
Actually, Drew and I went to his grave together.
No, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would guess that was an empty grave. I mean, I don't know. His wife was apparently I believe the only one who, besides the alleged medical examiner, which don't think anyone's ever been successful in locating, to the best of my understanding, the individual who signed that death certificate. Attempts to locate the physical person have failed, I believe, as the story goes. But his wife was big into witchcraft, so again, there is an occult aspect to all of these things relative to the '60s hippie counterculture or the grunge scene. For example, a lot of the early '60s bands they had occult names, right? And they had occult names, magical names, if you will. The Mamas and the Papas, John Phillips, they were the Golden Circle, Golden Triangle, Golden some sort of symbol associated with magic. I believe it's Golden Circle. And, I think there is that general understanding at the root of it. There's a lot of that stuff circling around the Seattle grunge scene as well, with the occult aspects of the situation. But
speaking of John Phillips, just since you mentioned him again,
sure,
I'm sure this is mentioned in the book and you know all about it, but much like myself, that gentleman was born on Parris Island, South Carolina.
Oh, nice. Yep. He was. His father was a Marine. Yep.
He was a retired Marine officer. So,
yep.
Again, I'm sure that's in your book.
Yeah, that's definitely highlighted here in Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. This is Dave McGowan's book here. That's the cover. Great book. Highly recommended to anyone who's not read that, including yourself there, Dan. Well, Phillips, he actually went to the Naval Academy. There we go. For a brief stint, which that's not easy to get into. You have to, get some juice there. So obviously his father wasn't just a Marine Corps, just run-of-the-mill Marine Corps officer. He knew some folks.
Right. Yeah.
But so like I said, you'd like to use him as a comparison of John Phillips's actions and activities relative to this Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon scene, as Dave Grohl is to the Smells Like Laurel Canyon scene there in the Seattle grunge counterculture. Because again, both of these figures, and I'll point them out, some of the characteristics I'm talking about here, they both connect to so many different aspects of the countercultural psyop narratives, right? So what I mean by that, as far as so many different things, like it would list 10 different factors, salient characteristics identified from each of the psychological operations that transpired in the Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, applying that to as like a checklist style to the grunge scene. Dave Grohl's hitting as many boxes as John Phillips is, right? I mean, they're both connected to a lot of folks from these families, from the military, et cetera, et cetera. They have all these very similar traits amongst them. They kind of, they're very long standing across both scenes. John Phillips, he died about 10 years ago, but he was very a lot of those '60s guys, didn't make it out of the '60s. Quite a few of them didn't. Into the early '70s, like Morrison or Hendrix and whatnot, or Paul McCartney, if you will, or Paul McCartney, however you want to look at that. But Phillips, he made it much further than a lot of some of his contemporaries, right? And you could say same could be said for Grohl, and there. So as a result of their long-lasting, status as far as not ODing or anything else wild that's going on in these scenes, not getting murdered, because there's murders in both scenes, right? They kind of almost become the figureheads of both of these scenes. Like anytime someone's talking about grunge nowadays, Dave Grohl's involved in that conversation. And same with John Phillips. He was kind of the guy that he was, if anyone was talking about the '60s, it's the Beach Boys, the Mamas and the Papas, because those are the folks that are still around, still alive, still put a camera in front of them and ask them questions, right? So, I think a lot of respects, very similar situation here with Dave Grohl and John Phillips. And of course, Dave Grohl, I mean, he's part of two major bands out of the grunge scene, essentially, right? Even though Foo Fighters was kind of post grunge, but obviously it was really Nirvana 2.0.
Right.
I mean, Nirvana was huge, Foo Fighters were huge, and again, the Mamas and the Papas, they were big time on their scene. So very similar, kind of apples to apples type of comparison here. That's John Phillips, notable, alleged kid diddler, notable wholesale cocaine trafficker. He did like 2 months in a medium security prison in Pennsylvania in like 1980. Kind of ridiculous when you get busted with pounds of coke, but who am I to say? I mean, if you're wearing that hat, you're doing a lot of coke, in my opinion. But who am I to say?
Right.
And a lot of incestuous rumors surrounding this man. Financier of a very creepy apocalyptic cult known as the Process Church of the Final Judgment, according to some federal investigations that took place back in the 60s and 70s. This man was integral in financing that weird cult that surrounds the numerous political assassinations from RFK to, just a number of assassinations, including, assassination attempts. They try to get Gerald Ford twice. Anyhow, the the process money man. That's right. Thank you, Dana. The creepy character all around. Again, as you pointed out, born in Paris Island. He's the son of a Marine Corps officer, right? He married one of John Adams' descendants, Susie Adams. He grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. Went to the same high school as Jim Morrison. I believe Mama Cass, his future band member from the Mamas and the Papas, I believe she also went to that school. She was in the same class as Morrison, I believe.
Really?
Maybe a year behind him. Yep. Pretty strange, right? You got these characters all going to high school together. Warren Beatty was at the opposite high school in Alexandria. He was Alexandria, Virginia. Maybe it was his was Arlington, maybe. Anyway, they were right next to each other. Warren Beatty, future Young Turk in the Hollywood weird scenes, right, inside Laurel Canyon scene. He was an opposing star athlete, in an opposing high school to John Phillips. So they knew each other from like playing basketball and I believe football against each other. They knew each other before that. I believe Jim Morrison again was maybe I think he was ahead of Morrison and Mama Cass as far as being at the high school because Phillips was a few years older than those folks. But nonetheless, they're all from the same geographical area, two high schools a few miles down the road from each other. And it's not just Warren Beatty because his sister was also part of the Young Turks, Shirley MacLaine.
That's his sister, huh?
Yep.
Did not know that.
Yep. So a lot of strange characters run around in the same immediate vicinity. This is years before they come on the scene as the biggest rock stars and movie stars, right, in Laurel Canyon. So that's John Phillips. Again, he's fits that mold as the military intelligence situations. And back to Dave Grohl, drummer from Nirvana and lead singer and guitarist of the Foo Fighters. Born in Ohio, huh?
Yep.
Is he from Cleveland? Is that why Cleveland rocks?
It's near there. Warren, Ohio. And apparently his father was an assistant to U.S. Senator
Bob Taft.
Robert Taft, yeah.
Bob Taft, number 2. Not to be confused with Bob Taft, number 3. He was never a senator, even though he tried a couple times.
Right.
He was the governor. They're all part of that Bush nexus of Ohio Republicans. But no, that's a good point because I think that plays in the role here. Because, again, Dave Grohl comes from his father was in the U.S. Army, stationed at Fort Benning back in the early 1960s, along with a future scion icon of the grunge scene, a man I like to refer to as the Pope of grunge because he's the mentor to so many of the different lead singing acts of grunge, and that was REM lead singer Michael Stipe.
Really?
So Michael Stipe's father, career Army officer, He was stationed along with Dave Grohl's father at Fort Benning back in the early 60s. And actually, that's here from Dave Grohl's mom's book, where she talks about that raising. Basically, I think it's called "From Cradle to Stage: How to Raise a Rock Star" or something like that. Can you even make that bigger? Nope, that's too many. We got a malfunction. Try to make that bigger here.
So she's cashing in on her kid's fame, huh? Good for her.
Oh well, yeah. So she's interviewing a number of different musicians here. I'm struggling to figure out how to make this bigger, so I'm gonna go ahead and go user error and try to read this here. But yeah, she interviews Michael Stipe's mom, and they're talking about how they're stationed together back at Fort Benning, right? PFC, Private First Class, James Grohl. That's Dave Grohl's father. He was assigned to the Army newspaper at Fort Benning. And he was a career newspaper man from his time there. I have his entire stat sheet here later on here. But real quick back here on the site, I think it's interesting that with his father being in media, right, as far as kind of a Operation Mockingbird situation, right? Like, are you familiar with Operation Mockingbird?
Not per se, no.
So, I think it's just one instance of what I presume are a lot of these kind of instances where the intelligence agencies of America, and for that matter, probably other nations' intelligence agencies, that's a different tangent altogether. But, CIA gets blamed, like CIA's Operation Mockingbird, right? Like, folks always wanted to say that, like, that's not the only game in town. And other nations' intelligence agencies have invaded at times various media outlets and whatnot in America. So yeah, everyone's kind of in that soup, CIA included, of course. I'm not trying to diminish their position by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, so it was an instance where in the 70s they had this operation called Mockingbird. I think it got found out in the 90s through like maybe an LA Times Freedom of Information Act request. I may have made that up. I don't know. That sounds accurate to me right now, though. So they came out with some LA Times was after some information, put in some FOIAs with the CIA, and I think that's when it got released. It was part of the Mockingbird thing. But anyway, regardless, the CIA had infiltrated. They had basically their approved sources in media outlets, often described. Anderson Cooper's often described in this capacity as some sort of CIA operative there at CNN and whatnot. And back when we were in high school, I don't know if you had this, Channel 1, I definitely remember Anderson Cooper on propaganda beamed right into high school classrooms in the 90s that I didn't care much for at the time, and I care for even less today. But that'd be a good example of what like Operation Mockingbird is.
Yeah, that wasn't a thing in our high school.
Oh, you didn't have Channel 1?
No.
Oh, yeah. All those people went on to like big time things. Like one of them got abducted by North Korea, I think it was. Lisa Ling, maybe. Clintons went and got her back. That sounds real shifty. You never want the Clintons to come save you from any country. I can assure you of that. But you want to be saved by the Clintons? I'd say leave me to die if you're sending Bill Clinton to come rescue me.
I want to be saved.
No, not if Bill Clinton's coming. It's may as well be Satan.
I wasn't necessarily questioning your statement there. I was kind of questioning why the fuck she was in a position to get abducted by North Korea in the first place.
That's a fantastic question, right? But I think that's a good example of these Operation Mockingbird style activities, right? Like, these media personalities, if you will, they're serving in other auspices in their activities and whatnot. And, I'm just proposing for just a moment, consider PFC James Grohl here is also one of those type of people inducted into this kind of military, maybe Army intelligence operations, right? They often don't get enough credit. Army intel, and you're an Army veteran, you're a retired Army man. I'll get, as a retired Air Force man, I'll give you folks some respect for the Army intel's operations. They're pretty good. They know what they're doing. I'm just saying, CIA often gets attributed to a lot of these activities. The Army's going to have people doing some Mockingbird stuff too. They're not going to be one left out in the cold.
Well, I think you're right. there are a lot of people I know would disagree with you, but I never had a whole bunch of direct contact with Intel. So
no, I mean not me necessarily either. I'm just pointing out
it never led me astray. So
the CIA often gets accused of things, but you don't really hear like necessarily the Army Intel or maybe the Office of Naval Intelligence. And for that matter, you know, outside of alien stuff, OSI or Air Force OSI, usually they're only getting accused of like alien psyops. But, you know, I assure you, these organizations are all involved in the same activities. They were all involved in the same activities in MK Ultra. That was proven through congressional hearings. In fact, the Air Force really loved MK Ultra stuff. So they're going to do all these other things too. So they all have their own Mockingbird stuff. And I'm just saying, like, you know, with the trajectory of somebody like James Grohl here from, you know, junior enlisted man in the Army to, you know, eventually running some executive status at major media corporations headquartered in Cincinnati. You mentioned the Tafts. He worked alongside with one of the Tafts there at Taft Broadcasting and working his way up through Scripps Media, which is also headquartered in Cincinnati. There's a lot. I don't remember the exact particulars there. It was during the 80s takeover of all these media corporations. There's a lot of different media corporations buying up other entities. And there was a lot of Scripps, Taft broadcasting activities going on at that time, predating that time. I think back to the 60s, actually. Those two corporations were purchasing entities together. And so Grohl's doing business with the Tafts later on and then goes to work for Bob Taft Jr. as a staffer. So, yeah. So, you know, this would be the perfect character as what I would think of the outline of somebody who was on that trajectory of a Mockingbird style media person with his trajectory of Army up into the corporate, you know, hierarchy of the media corporations, right? Doing, you know, media mergers and whatnot, then going to work, you know, working with the Taft family, right? Working with descendants from the founder of the Skull and Bones, right? The infamous, familiar with the legends of the Skull and Bones there, Dan?
A bit, yeah.
Yale.
I've seen movies. Yeah.
You've seen the skulls?
School Ties.
Paul Walker.
Yeah.
It's actually I think that's actually a pretty good depiction of the legends surrounding the organization. Thought that was not bad. You know, as far as who knows if it's factually accurate, it's at least legendarily accurate.
Yeah.
Right? So the descendants of the guy that started that, Alfonso Taft, or the Tafts we're talking about here, right? Because there are different Tafts. There's a different branch of Tafts that are at the early onset and hierarchy of the executive class of the Mormon Church, right? So Taft's very, very prominent family. These Tafts, however, are the Alfonso Tafts, who was the father of William Howard Taft, the only U.S. president and Supreme Court justice in American history, chief of the Supreme Court justice. So obviously a pretty prominent family, right? So Grohl's doing business big time with them, right? They're doing some obviously media stuff, right? Then they're doing the political stuff. So big time.
You mentioned MK Ultra. Is there an assertion that was involved or part of the dealings here with Laurel Canyon?
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, big time. There's definitely some implications surrounding that as well. Yeah, with the Laurel Canyon scene, and I would argue with the grunge scene as well.
Well, I think they didn't need a whole bunch of coercion to do their psychedelics, but
well, psychedelics are a big part of the grunge scene as well, not just the '60s scene. For example,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
they were doing their own MK Ultra experiment.
Exactly. I think that's part of it, right? You have to introduce the psychedelics to accomplish some of these MK Ultra tasks and goals, right? The aims of whatever program they're doing, they got to introduce the drugs in which to help accomplish that. And there's figures like Courtney Love, who allegedly, according to her own father, who was one of the managers, I say managers, more like intelligence handlers of the Grateful Dead band. Hank Harrison, he's a blue blood Harrison family, one of the first families of Virginia. Produced a couple presidents themselves. He even said his daughter was dealing drugs for the CIA as early as 7. She grew up with. He claims that she grew up with her mother. He had no control over it. but nonetheless, there's obviously a strong psychedelic current, and there's even individuals that carry over from both scenes. It sounds like, or it appears. Yeah, Grateful Dead. Yeah, Grateful Dead equals CIA. I agree with that one. And also equals Tavistock. Grateful Dead. Tavistock is a psychological warfare quote unquote think tank from the UK. There's one of the dudes that founded that. His son was the Grateful Dead's music publishing, the president of their music publishing company.
So are we saying Grateful Dead was part of the CIA, or is a direct result of the CIA?
I think it's more of a direct result, because again, like the CIA needed a marketing. Oh, what's up there, Clint? Clint Eastwood's here joining us. Yeah, Clint, we're just talking some of the psychological operations here. We're going to do some call-ins here shortly. Appreciate your question there, bud. Yeah, I'd say it's the psychological operations surrounding, like, if you need to perpetrate these things, these psychological warfare, you need a marketing tool, right? Like the Grateful Dead, I view them as, one of the primary marketing tools for acid, right? That there's reports that have been done showing the distribution network that even up into the 90s was I think they quit touring in 95, maybe 94. There's been studies that show the distribution of acid that has followed the Grateful Dead from the 60s through the 90s. So if you want to market it, I mean, if you want to get these drugs out there, you have to market it. And their guy, the Dancing Bear, right? That was the actual acid chemist, Stanley Owsley III, another quote unquote blue blooder, if you will. He was known as the Dancing Bear, and he actually was one of the main chemists for the CIA. So yeah, it's
that was
I wouldn't say
name?
The Dancing Bear, yeah, because I guess he danced his way up to people's houses and delivering acid or whatnot.
And
he was a big grizzly fella, I believe.
Different thing.
Yeah, I don't think it had the same. I don't think it was the same terminology. I also agree. I actually used to, I've probably done a fair amount of psychedelics in my life, but I have also listened to a fair amount of Grateful Dead in my life, and you almost do need drugs to tolerate it.
I got to thinking about this the other day. I don't think I can name a single Grateful Dead song. I don't know a goddamn thing about their music.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about Fish, which is kind of the Grateful Dead 2.0.
Yeah. I don't know their music either.
I couldn't name a song. Couldn't tell you. And they're from Burlington, Vermont, a place I've spent a good deal of my life in. So yeah, Michael's, so the Stipes, Michael Stipe, he's very integral. Like I said, I call him kind of the Pope of grunge, right? He's such an integral portion in this whole Nirvana storyline or the Dave Grohl storyline that he's inducting them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And
yeah, they're buddies.
Yeah, one of Michael Stipe's best friends, speaking to the CIA connections and some of the other intelligence connections here. So the attorney and the band's manager for REM, right, for 30 plus years, was a fellow by the name of Burtis Downs, number 4, the fourth. Let's call him number 4. His dad was Burtis Downs, number 3. And for 40 years, though, from 1964 till this document over here from 2004, 1964, Burtis Downs, number 3, dies. The Reverend Burt Downs dies in a plane accident, quote unquote accident, on Air America, what is known later in life as Air America, the CIA's drug running civil air transport, a company founded in 1946, yada, yada, yada. That becomes known later as Air America. This was attributed as an accident. The REM's manager and attorney for 30 years, his father was allegedly like a Presbyterian reverend or some sort of Protestant reverend. Until 2004, we're here on the right. This Department of State telegram gets declassified. You can see the CIA circled. You can see the locations. And it's a notification to tell Burtis Downs, number 2, that his son died in a takeover, hostage, or a hijacking. It was not an accident. When it was declassed, that plane got hijacked in Taiwan in 1964. So this is the early onset of Vietnam. I mean, ground troops were only in Vietnam for a few months by this point, really. January of 64 to June.
And this is when the Reverend Lost
The
his
Reverend
religion.
died. He lost his religion. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one. Yep, that is indeed correct. Yeah, and Burtis Downs #4 was probably, I think, 3 or 4 years old at the time, so he probably didn't remember his dad. Probably had no idea, even growing up, that his father was a secret CIA agent guy, right? Because it's not declassified until 2004. So who knows? Maybe he got put in that position as REM's manager and lawyer because his father was CIA. Maybe he didn't even know that. I have no idea. I don't know the man. I'm just pointing out some of the connections here. So you have one of the characters I compare him to is Dennis Hopper. So let me.
Dennis Hopper, the actor, or
Dennis Hopper, the actor.
one of his
He was
characters?
part of the Young Turk scene, right, from the Laurel Canyon situation. This is an interview he did a few years before he passed, about 10 years ago, and pointing out some of the quote unquote blue blood heritage, or one of my favorite things to point out, the Society of Cincinnati families. I realize I fall in that category, but nonetheless, I'm still going to point out other folks who fall in that category.
As does John Phillips.
John, yep, for sure. Dennis Hopper here, he's a Boone. He's a descendant of Daniel Boone's sister. So that's definitely I believe he's a major or a captain in the society there out of North Carolina, I believe. The North Carolina chapter of the society, old Daniel Boone there, the frontiersman. But yeah, so Dennis Hopper's part of the Boone family. That's a interesting fun fact. But also, if you read down further here in this interview, this is the first time he admits that his father wasn't just some rural postman from Virginia. He was actually a spook, dating back to the Office of Strategic Services. Yeah. Because they were like, wait, and this was kind of a revelation. This was this was contemporary to McGowan. I think had already printed his Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon when Hopper brought this light. No one knew, so like this was almost like a confirmation of McGowan's thesis, right? Like, here's the thesis, and these people are all part of these families. And Dennis Hopper's like, no, my father wasn't a postman. He was a spook he's just pretending to be, or that's his front cover, whatever. So I just think it's funny these things again. It's if it wasn't so many, like the pattern repeats so frequently, it's to me there's just no way this is inorganic, right? Like I know some folks like to attribute things to the universe, like, oh, the universe does strange things. I'm like, well, this is obviously organized. This is obviously planned, right?
There does seem to be a good bit of coincidence happening.
Yeah. So I'm just pointing out, like when Dave Grohl's father says that he's an Army newsman, right? And well, maybe that is just a cover story because you got Reverend Burt Downs from the REM scene. He's lost his religion in Taiwan, and and then you got Dennis Hopper's dad. He's like, oh shoot, my dad wasn't just a postman. He's a spook, yeah. So I just think there are these instances that will continue to exhibit a pattern of these people, having secret intelligence folks, as parents. So this was a kind of this one was the kind of the stats on Dave Grohl's dad there, Jim Grohl. So, he says right here, after serving the Army from 61 to 64, that was there at Fort Benning. He started a career in media, right? It mentions he took a job here in 60 or 72 at the Washington Bureau for Scripps Howard newspapers. That's, again, that other media corporation headquartered out of Cincinnati still today, along with Taft Broadcasting. That's how he got integrated with the Tafts, was through that wing of his career, where he later served as special assistant to, as you mentioned, Senator Bob Taft #2. So very connected dude. I'm just saying this guy seems to fit a mold of somebody I would expect to have these as front jobs, right? And so with it's not just Dave Grohl's dad, right, that's connected to the Tafts. So Dudley Taft here, that's who Dave Grohl's dad, this guy was the president and vice chairman, right, of Taft Broadcasting, which big company. They owned, like they built Kings Island, for example. That was Taft Broadcasting. They had a lot of ventures outside of just television programming and news. And then he ran the company. So his father started this company. Well, actually, I think his grandfather did but that was a newspaper back then. His father's the one who made it into a TV company, Taft Broadcasting. But so Dudley Taft here, his son was a major figure in the grunge. So you have Dave Grohl's dad, you know, he's working alongside major media figure such as Taft here, right? And then working clearly very closely with the Taft family, working with Bob Taft, that's Dudley Taft's son, right? So Dudley Taft Jr. was a member of a band named Sweetwater. Oh. This is Alfonso Taft again. This is the man, the Skull and Bones guy.
Sweetwater.
This dude was not in the grunge act. Long before grunge existed, this dude was dead. This is the guy that started Skull and Bones, but that's the Taft line. And, you know, I just left this in here as far as the strange deaths that occur around these scenes and around these families. Like, that was one of the notable factors within Weird Seeds Inside the Canyon. A lot of the musicians and actors, their parents, you know, died some suspicious deaths or suicides and, you know, weird things like that. Same thing happened here, you know, with the grunge scene. So Dudley Taft, the grunge rocker, his grandfather, the head of Taft Broadcasting, Holbert Taft Jr., just blew up in his bomb shelter in Indian Hill over there in the mounds, rich mound area of Cincinnati. No big deal. No big deal when a billionaire just blows up in a bomb shelter and his 27-year-old son takes over the empire. Totally normal, right? This is Dudley Taft Jr. He was the lead singer of a band named Sweetwater. He went to a private school there in the banks of the Puget Sound in Seattle. I believe it's called the Washington School. You may have heard of him in recent years. I believe he has a beer company in Cincinnati, Taft Beer, Taft Brewery.
I've heard of that.
But you may have heard of him also a few years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. There was a group of folks that were trying to change the U.S. Constitution through a vote, not through the legislative process at the U.S. or the Ohio Senate. That was him. He was helping finance some of that stuff. They were trying to make pot legalized through a constitutional amendment done through a voting process, which was some weird loophole.
Yeah.
But yeah. He was involved in that. That was Dudley Taft.
All right.
And a little bit post-grunge situation here, just to show some of this, more of these transitions and connections between folks like Dave Grohl to the Tafts, right? Well, at that prestigious school there in Washington, Dudley Taft was classmates with the guys who, coincidentally enough, which I'm sure in my mind is not much of a coincidence, the presidents of the United States of America. They were a post-grunge kind of band. You know, you familiar with these guys? The Lump?
Right? He's Lump.
Yeah.
He's Lump.
Yeah.
In my
So those are Dudley Taft's classmates. Dudley Taft, who's from a very presidential family, you know. I just think that's kind of less than irony. I think it's more intentional that they would name something like that. You know,
that they would name the band that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you see a lot of these correlations, right, between the grunge scene, the counterculture, with folks like Dave Grohl compared to folks like John Phillips, right? Like, seems to be a lot of correlations and crossover, don't you think?
Yeah, there for sure. Like I said, a lot of seeming coincidences.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it just speaks to me. It speaks to the what I like to call the inorganic nature of the entire movement. From the full blown kind of social engineering aspects of the fashion to the language, right, to the voting. Rock the vote. It's got a full spectrum of purposes, in my opinion. And it was serving the same purposes in the '60s as it was in the '90s, as it is in a certain regard today still, I think.
Basically, all these bands are the psyops.
Yeah, they're their own franchise, if you will,
the delivery
of the psyop. Exactly. Marketing. That's the best way I like to describe it, because, again, I mean, they're very impactful in society. I mean, Eddie Vedder was able to help get a convicted child murderers, 3 of them, out of prison, because he's Eddie Vedder. You familiar with the West Memphis 3?
It's familiar. I mean, you'll have to tell me the story, but
Clint's got a good comment here. Amazing you use the phrase inorganic nature of the music. I've been saying it in a different way, how everything we see isn't naturally cool. it's all put on a pedestal by investors. Yeah, for sure, Clint. Absolutely. And Clint's gonna join us in here in a moment for a phone call. I'll be posting the link to the discussion in the chat if anyone else wants to call in after Clint. We're wrapping up our end of the discussion here, Dan. But yeah, I mean, what do you think here as far as, you know, should there be a countercultural scene regardless of its impact? But should there be a countercultural scene in the 60s that is identical to the and framework and characteristics as to the 90s countercultural?
Should there be? As in,
yeah, like, does that seem reasonable? Like, it doesn't really.
It seems reasonable that there is. Whether or not it should be is a different story, you know?
Yeah, and I look at it like if one's inorganic, then the other one's inorganic. And again, because of the comparisons and correlations between the two, they can't.
Yeah,
if the 60s was inorganic, then the 90s can't be organic. You know,
I imagine that's not a coincidence that the two are so similar.
And involves people from the same families, right?
Yeah, the framework is already there to build that, so just go ahead and do it.
Sure. But yeah, so West Memphis 3, yeah, definitely guilty for sure. It was the if you recall a documentary in HBO, Paradise Lost, I think was the name of it. Anyway, 3 teenagers led by one fellow named Damien Eccles murdered these 3 little boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. And folks like Eddie Vedder funded, or him and like Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings, they financed the attorneys to get these men out of prison. They're still convicted. They'll go around saying they're not convicted today, but they signed Alfred pleas to get out of prison, meaning they were admitting guilt. They just, Eddie Vedder and gang had sued, you know, financed the lawyers to sue enough out of Arkansas. Arkansas was like, look, we're over it. I'm sure there's more political stuff that went on behind the scenes, but
was the assertion there from Eddie and Peter Jackson, whoever, that they weren't guilty?
Oh yeah, they helped finance the documentaries, like 3 of them, accusing everyone under the sun, despite excluding statements made by the perpetrator, the main perpetrator, admitting guilt. Like in interviews he did with the detectives, video recorded interviews that were used in his trial. I mean, this is what helped convict him. He knew what are referred to as like polygraph keys. These are the details of a crime that law enforcement holds back to ask suspects. Typically in polygraph situations, whether or not they're going to use the polygraph or not, they want to use that as a tool in the process to judge the responses. So he knew that these details, and later tried to, you know, talk them off in other ways. But obviously, he had admitted guilt in knowing those details, while one of his cohorts, his partners in crime, actually admitted to doing the crime. So there was no question. Like, there's still no question. They'll go around saying there's a question. There's no question. And this fella's best friends with like Johnny Depp, Marilyn Manson, you know what I mean? Some real creepy folk. Deep into the occult business, you know, Crowleyism, Thelemite religions, the do as thou wilt nonsense. But yeah, that's the kind of impact I think folks like Eddie Vedder have achieved, right? Like, had he not been, I mean, maybe there's more to it because he's in some sort of operation or program that he has more connections. But I think just generally speaking, his impact on society, like, that's what's helped him achieve getting Damien Eccles off of, death row, because he was on death row. The other 2 weren't, but he was. And again, like they seem to be good friends post prison. And for somebody, maybe it's just me, to go out, if you're trying to sell records, if you're Pearl Jam trying to do tours and records, I don't think it's a good look at going around with a convicted diddler, child murderer. It seems to be a bad look. I don't know.
Well, you know, shortly after that,
it's a good point, Clint.
Went their separate ways for a bit.
Did they?
I thought so. I mean, they kind of fell off the map as far as making music for a little while.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they came back 2 years ago, maybe, and did an album, did a tour.
That's what.
Yeah, so I mean, they still seem to have the ability to do that, right? Like some acts, like I don't know that they have the ability to come back and do a tour, sell some albums years after. I don't know, maybe Oasis. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong because everyone seems to be all on the rage of Oasis, and I didn't
we're
like,
getting back
I didn't
together.
like them when they were. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. But so they clearly have they can generate some interest years later after not releasing the album. So maybe I'm wrong in that assessment.
Which
I just personally don't like Oasis. So
I don't mind Oasis, but I mean they're no Pearl Jam.
yeah, there's no Pearl Jam, that's for sure. Well, I'm gonna have Clint here join us here for some commentary and questions. Clint, how you doing, bud? It's Clint Eastwood, Third World Assassin.
We're that Cleveland Guardians hat.
Yeah, oh, you mean Indians? Yeah, it's interesting how that precursor band of Pearl Jam was called Temple of the Dog.
Yeah,
so I was saying Astarte, because the worshippers of the Temple of the Dog were called Ashtaroth. Are you guys familiar with that, or?
I'm familiar with some of the Dog Star stuff, but yeah. Well, go ahead, Dan. What was that?
I thought you were talking about the band.
Yeah, the band. I do believe that the band may be named after the star Sirius.
No, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, like certain bands, like Perfect Circle. The songs they have a Vesica symbol for their symbol, and the songs are about very dark songs about suicide and symbology of a goddess.
No, I think you're onto something. I was kind of making some of that commentary earlier. It might have been before you joined us, but talking about how some of these bands from the '60s and the hippie Laurel Canyon scene, they had a very occult nature to their names, right? Be it the Grateful Dead, they were named the Warlocks, right? And then the Mamas and the Papas were the Golden Circle. So I think there is something to these names. So when you put the Temple of the Dog, yeah, I think that's with the name Temple. I mean, it's right there in the name. I mean, you're talking about some sort of religious or cult aspect.
Yeah,
and all these from the Freemasons to the Rosicrucians, they all seem to be very interested in the Dog Star. They're very serious about Sirius.
Yeah, it's huge. It's like part of the
Sirius XM. Yeah, Sirius
like,
XM's got the dog logo, right? I mean, they're all kind of paying homage to that, right?
Yeah, like the Scottish Rite House of the Temple in their New Age magazine specifically talks about the Great White Brotherhood and the Lodge Sirius. It seems to be a backbone of the mystery schools, along with Illuminism, where the person is supposedly making themselves better, because if you ask any Mason, they'll be like, oh, Masonry is about making oneself better. And it's like, well, what the hell does that mean? But then you find out that they're Illuminists and that they're all practicing Illuminism, where they believe in secular humanism, that they're a god or something. And it's like,
sure,
it's like, Jesus Christ, the ego trip on these people is fucking. I didn't mean to swear.
No, you're good, man.
Swearing is okay.
Go right ahead, bud.
Yeah, they're sitting there saying they're gods and shit, fucking telling the public, just laughing at us, the public, the useless eaters, quote unquote, and fucking because it's like anybody who doesn't go along with this Illuminist system is considered lawful prey to the secret societies. And that the in France, I've been studying France a lot lately because of the Illuminist conspiracy of the revolution there, where the Illuminists, that was the first generation of the conspiracy. That was most likely under the thumb of the Jesuits, the Vatican through Weishaupt and his Rosenpierre and the other couple of goons that were. But the conspiracy then goes.
We're talking like what, like 1780, the French onset of the French Revolution.
Yeah, they conquered France, raised the red flag of the Illuminati. Then they went to Russia, conquered Russia, raised the red flag, and then they went to Germany after that, raised the red flag, and then now they're in China, operating the Illuminist scheme of money and enslavement of the masses. Basically, it's like what we're seeing in China is the precursor of what they want the rest of the world to be. This whole systematic what do they call that, damn it, I'm a little bit buzzed, damn it, dead air time.
No worries. Yeah, I know. I know what you mean. Though I mean, there is these power political groups that do definitely have a deep interest with this occult nonsense, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and again, just like from the bands we're talking about tonight, if you think about the bands we're talking tonight, Nirvana, right? I mean, that's a heightened state of mysticism, right? Like an achieved state of mysticism, right?
Yeah.
Then you have REM, which when you're talking about MK Ultra and hypnosis or anything else like that, I mean, you're talking about that REM kind of that sleep cycle, that state of the brain cycle that you're achieving with REM sleep.
Yeah,
it's more about the state of the brain cycle versus.
Well, like REM and certain bands like that, how they sucked, and it was like
they're terrible. I don't think any of them are good.
Popular,
Yeah, no, I think they're forced to be popular because of playtime and things like, especially REM. They were one of the early MTV bands, and MTV was one of the hosts that was pushing them on there was their manager, and his brother was their booking agent, and those two men were the sons of Stuart Copeland, the CIA Scientologist dude, who his sons just happened to name their bands The Police. Sting's band The Police. Yeah. The other Copeland's the drummer in that band. I think Ian Copeland maybe. Then you have the IRS records, and you have the FBI something booking incorporated. All these three brothers, they were all very integral in the early onset of MTV, with one being some of the talent with Sting, or the Police, as the drummer in The Police. Then you had one of the brothers was the on-air host, promoting a lot of the talent. The other one was behind the scenes management and booking. But one of their top bands was REM. So, I mean, you literally have a direct connection right there again with the CIA and pushing these things. Because I think it takes something like that to push these things. Because no one, I mean, REM, I remember thinking at the time, like, this band's terrible. Like, who's listening to this music?
Yeah, it's definitely I found that out with the Bad Religion band. I found out that the lead singer was like a Marxist. I was like, oh, what the hell? And I'm like, fuck this band. I'm not listening to them anymore. Like, he's some professor spouting Marxism, trying to destroy our constitutional republic. Like, I don't understand how people can run around with this bullshit revolutionary rhetoric of how they're against America, and that it's like,
right,
we're trying to be pro-America and they're calling us radicals and stuff, and it's like, this is bullshit. We're not radical. We're conservative towards a constitutional republic, which was promised to us by our posterity, which is the founding fathers. And that, all these, they want to use all sorts of arguments, which I won't mention because most rely on, like, oh, the founding fathers were racist, and oh, they were members of certain secret societies, but they knew the game of what European monarchies and aristocracies were playing with the taxes and the unlawful jurisdiction, the game the courts would play out with people, and that,
sure.
So that they wanted to put in stone rights that could not be denied. That's why they call them creator endowed rights, and that these spy networks of product sellers who are catching every opinion we have and advertising it to us, and basing bands and music on what the populace kind of thinks. It's like, it's all about this, like, this, not necessarily like swaying that a certain idea into the people's heads, but just an emotional state where they want the people scared and pacified by bands that are all weak and
No, you're bringing some good points. I definitely agree with what you're saying there, Clint, especially with the Marxist impact on our constitutional republic and whatnot, and the diminishing of our constitutional rights. And I think a lot of it is promoted through these ideals. I mean, look at people like John Lennon. I mean, I think it's what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of these bands or these operations of these psychological operations surrounding the bands are Marxist principles.
Yeah. Yeah, they destroyed they were scared of the beatnik movement, so then they created the hippie movement to kind of just flood it out. And then the hippie movement was all, because they always use this whole peace idea to, it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's how they get these Marxists to jump on board.
Well, look at the song by, again, they're not often looked at as a Laurel Canyon band, even though they were very much part of the Laurel Canyon scene, the Beatles. John Lennon's Imagine. I mean, that's like that's got to be like a Marxist dream, right? Checking out those lyrics.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think he ever tried to make any bones about the fact that he,
Marxist.
Yeah, he was.
Some people
marrying a communist Chinese lady probably a good indicator.
Yeah. Yeah, but I remember that post I think I tagged you in it about the Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, I saw that. Yep.
Yeah, it's like they're setting the masses, because all the Marxist, socialist, communists all refer to all the people as the masses. That's the only reason why. Actually, I'm not a totalitarian or anything, but they got the masses all set in checkmate with these ideas that. It's just like that scene in Full Metal Jacket where Gomer Pyle gets caught with the donut, and then the drill sergeant is like, "Okay, you're gonna eat your donut, and everybody else is gonna do push-ups." And Gomer Pyle's sitting there eating the donut, and then later in the movie, he gets beat up by people with soap in a bag in their pillowcase. Yeah. And they're giving certain people in America special privileges, like immigrants, for example. And that it's setting up this hatred by people who aren't that group. And so it's like the Illuminists know how the human nature works, and they don't pay people to do their bidding. They have devotees who believe in what they're doing, and this cultural revolution, which is it's very dangerous, because all these the youth is all straight up, hook, line, and sinker into this Marxist revolutionary religion. And that, because I call it a religion because their God is Marx, and his word is infallible.
No, it is a religion in that respect for sure. And I think as far as the government in outsourcing folks to do their bidding, I think we're seeing that right now. I believe the state of Colorado has been annexed off to Venezuela, if I'm not mistaken.
Huh. That's weird.
maybe you're not officially, but from the looks of things, a lot of Venezuelan criminal activity popping off out there right now. It seems to be sanctioned as well.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of Chinese immigrants in Colorado that are setting up giant grow factories for weed and mushrooms, and they're selling massive amounts of drugs online, on Twitter, on any platform you could think of, Facebook.
Well, that's the Chinese doing that, huh?
Yeah, same thing in California. They've got huge warehouses with all immigrants just growing the shit out of weed and mushrooms and fucking slinging the shit out of them, and it's crazy. I mean, they're giving them all a slap on the wrist. They're not actually punishing these people when they get caught. And that same with the
rapists. I would say it seems to be part of the agenda. I mean, in my former professional life as a private investigator, I did some work with number of folks that delved in some political circles. I remember, kind of holding court with one of those group of those folks, describing how America had been invaded by left-wing Marxist, various left-wing Marxist organizations, various organizations espousing left-wing Marxist ideals that had not necessarily on paper working or the same organization, but due to the fact that their ideals cross over and they all hate America, they're all working together. And I don't think that's necessarily a new thing, but I had some very specific examples of these things that I was presenting to these venue of folk. It's been going on for a while. I mean, look at the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground. On paper they should hate each other. I mean, by all appearances, they should hate each other. The extreme kind of left wing black ideology versus the extreme left wing white ideology. One screaming kill white, the other one saying like let's do crimes together. And eventually they did crimes together. So I don't think it's necessarily a new thing, but it seems to be happening with greater frequency and, kind of ramped up in our current day and age.
Yeah, it's like I tell the Black Panthers.
Frankfurt School of Economics. That's a big Marxist
kind
of
Germany.
Yeah, well, I'd say the Frankfurt School, and I mean that's basically all Marxism ideals, right? Being espoused there within the economic sector.
Oh yeah, all the professors these days every school is littered with Marxists. But the I was going to say something about the. Damn it, I shouldn't have got so buzzed before I came in.
Well, Dan, what did back? I did like that post you made, Clint, about, and that was a good point you made about with the full metal jacket.
Special privileges that they're allowing.
Yeah. But that's a good scene though in that movie, Dan. What did you like? That's a pretty accurate scene of some. I mean, I saw some similar activity pop off in basic training, right? Like, I don't know if that's.
Oh yeah, that's across the board. That's pretty
accurate.
Yeah, pretty normal, pretty accurate. But to make that connection to society today, that's also pretty accurate, I think.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah, for sure. I think scary. I think it's it's becoming a trend too amongst some states doing more privileges for more immigrants. So that definitely is. Yeah, there's more. What's the animal farm common animal farm phrase that they from the book Animal Farm? Some animals are more equal than others, or whatnot.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's like the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution says that basically no citizen can have a right that another citizen can't exercise.
Right.
And they're making up rights that aren't real, and that we can't exercise those
right
rights.
To choose a gender. I mean, that's been the new thing, right? Like pushing the idea that folks have the right to choose a gender, but you don't have a right for freedom of speech. I think it's I think that was very intentional, trying to call one a right versus trying to diminish the actual right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's like the communist goal is to destroy the American way of life and the family unit, and that the communist countries aren't
principles.
Yeah, it's like they're not doing that in the Soviet communist countries. They're only doing it here, where they're manipulating the youth into, because all these people are the rainbow crowd is all Marxist. And it's very disturbing how all of them could be Marxists in that.
Look at BLM. BLM's their stated agenda was very Marxist as well. I mean, destroy the nuclear family, destroy the middle class. That's always every one of these Marxist groups is always destroy the middle class. I'm like, how does anyone sign up for this? Like, I mean, how does it, like, even regardless of how much money you make, where you fall socioeconomically speaking, how does anyone think that's a good idea? Like, I think that's probably not a good idea. Like, that's my immediate inclination to hearing we should destroy the middle class. Like, I don't know if that's a good idea. It just doesn't sound right to me.
Well, plus,
like, face doesn't sound right.
In the Nasta Webster book, World Revolution, she lays, which is a controversial book because she was kind of an anti-Semite, which if you ignore that part, the whole book is really good. But like she proves that the Illuminists, each name of person, she proves the whole Communist Manifesto came from these first generation Illuminists, and that and William Cooper goes into detail about Weishaupt flat out still being a Jesuit and never being an ex-Jesuit, and that it was just an extension of the, it's like the Alumbrados to the Jesuits to the Illuminati, then back to then they decided to rename themselves into multiple. That's why the communists use the symbol of the rising sun in the East, and like Bill Clinton had a speech. He's a Rhodes Scholar, by the way, which
Bill Clinton. Well, he didn't graduate, but he did go there, correct?
Oh yeah, but he had a speech where he said, talking about the dawn of a new day, the rising of in the East, and that some of Jordan Maxwell's greatest work was that video about
shocker from a guy who hired. Oh, go ahead, Clint. Go ahead.
Oh, but it's like Clinton, Bill Clinton. See there was a guy far back, which this kind of has to do with Roosevelt and Roosevelt marrying his wife, who was also a Roosevelt, but Clinton Roosevelt. I don't remember what year that was, but Clinton Roosevelt was one of these Illuminists perpetuating the Marxism and their idea. See, this one.
I would say Clinton was a Nazi, though, and I quite honestly don't think there's a lot of difference between the two, Marxists and Nazis. I think they both fundamentally they're saying a lot of the same things. Yeah, they're trying to achieve a lot of the same things too. I mean, when you get down to brass tacks of it, I think they very much have more alike than they do or more similar than they are dissimilar.
Well, it's like
but real quick on Clinton, he literally hired the son of an SS Nazi as his Joint Chief of Staff. I mean, I don't know how you get much more Nazi than that in the 90s, but being like, let's see, who do I want to be the top general of America? Let me hire that SS officer, son. That's a good idea.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like the Illuminati was running the slave trade through the Scottish Rite, through the B'nai B'rith, and that one of these Illuminists, you know, which Nast Webster quotes, he says, we need to legitimize slavery because they realized the gig was up. They could no longer openly shackle people. And so,
sure,
you know, that's when they set up these elaborate systems of taxation, which far exceed anything, you know, that, you know, it's just crazy. It's like 1/3 of our paychecks.
Oh, it's got to be more than that, though. Really, if you consider inflation and just, you know, a lot of there's a number of other factors that factor in there. But yeah, I think that the whole taxation thing, like, there's a lot more people today questioning those situations than there was even 10 years ago, I think. But I think you're right about a lot of these Marxist situations that are being perpetrated through these political channels. But I also view occultists in the same way. Like, if my understanding is correct, I believe there's some crossover in lineage between the Golden Dawn and Weishaupt's Illuminati over there in Bavaria. There's some sort of crossover in the lineage between those organizations. And if you look at like Thelemic organizations, such as one I mentioned earlier that was financed by Papa John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, they espouse Marxist ideals as well. They want to destroy the middle class. They want to destroy the nuclear family. These are all ideals professed by that cult. So, like, I look at these like, it's not even just the political channels that have been infiltrated by these Marxists. It's these occult networks as well that operate.
Yeah. Well, they're reaching towards a symbolic rise of Atlantis. That's what they call the world socialist communist government. The rise of Atlantis. So whenever you see these high occultists speaking about Atlantis and this stuff, they're talking about the rebirth of this world government that runs full socialism, communism, and that the people are permanently enslaved by this government. That, you know, it's...
Well, that's a good point. Well, Manly P. Hall was a major scholar in these efforts, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, he's perpetrating these ideals of Atlantis in the new destiny of America.
Yeah, Cooper says that you need to read his books with a very fine-tooth comb because he's constantly speaking in the esoteric sense, and where if you take it at face value, it's not what he's actually speaking about, and that these occultists have been doing this great work for this world communist government for quite some time. And part of the other great work is to make the masses believe that they are gods, quote unquote.
Sure. No, I think Manly P. Hall is a great example because he's a major. Not only is he a Freemason scholar of these ideas, he's also a major occultist outside of Freemasonry. I mean, he was involved in a lot of occultism. According to folks like Ed Sanders, the author Ed Sanders of the Family, he may have been associated with such things as the Grand Shingon cult, which was a Kali worshipping Buddhist cult from Japan, I believe is how it goes. And that, you know, with the names of Chingon that revolve around the legends of Charlie Manson, these are apparently also, according to Ed Sanders, really go back through a cult likely operated by Manly P. Hall, and I believe he's even proposed to be the Grand Chingon to, you know, at least as a suspect within that for that position, which again is associated with a lot of these Thelemic occult groups that obviously have philosophical impact from other things, like this cult with Manly P. Hall. It was again some sort of chaos Kali worshipping death cult that had instituted some sort of, you know, Buddhist principles by way of Japan of all places. Because you know, those religions don't originate from Japan, so, you know, it's just these principles obviously, you know, they go across borders and whatnot. But it just seems like all these characters and all these different things, yeah, they seem to focus on things like Marxism. And again, all of these occult ideals, the Marxism, the occultism, these things are all seemingly getting, you know, perpetrated through the rock music, right? Like from the 60s and the Laurel Canyon scene and the 90s and the grunge scene. And, I think it's very interesting that folks are starting to realize these aspects, but be it books like Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon or discussions like this. I just think it's interesting that it's indicative of maybe a change in the nature of things, I think.
I was watching.
Clint, I'm going to wrap up here. I appreciate you joining us here in the discussion. You bring up some great points. I'll let you. You got any parting words or any you doing one of your usual marathon streams tomorrow? Was it Friday? Yeah, tomorrow.
Yeah, that one stream went a little bit out of hand because I drank some.
Yeah, you're hardcore, man. I think you did 12 hours the other night when I joined you there for a bit.
Yeah, it was 13 hours, but
nice.
YouTube only goes to 12 hours. So.
Oh, okay, I see.
One of the callers was fucking calling. Somebody came on and they were talking all this shit, and I was trying to set them straight because they were making everybody look bad, and it was, you know, it was, you know, a lot of the conspiracy people, they don't understand that the Constitution is an operating system and a contract, and that our government is the Constitution, and that they must abide by the letter of contract. And all we have to legally do to solve everything is file paperwork to compel performance of the contract, which is the Constitution. And that, you know, this guy was trying to incite violence, and I'm like, we don't need violence, because if they followed the law, we would have already won. And that, you know, it's basically we just have to file a bunch of paperwork to compel performance. And you know, it's a long story, but yeah, holler at my YouTube if you want a Third World Assassin, one word. Add me on Twitter and listen to William Cooper, because I've learned a lot of stuff from William Cooper's research from the Hour of the Time and his like 1,500 episodes of stuff that'll just melt your mind with fucking, you know, raw intelligence, basically.
Yeah, I was about to say, and the one thing I learned from Bill Cooper is it's all connected to intelligence. That's a good, great comment there, Luke Fisk Limeade.
Yeah, there's definitely.
Yeah. Speaking of Bill Cooper, I don't know his exact genealogy. I do know his father's middle name was Vance. I'm just saying he's probably part of the family.
Interesting. Oh yeah, but yeah, thanks for having me on. It was cool to talk for a minute. Sorry I talked so much.
No, you bring up some great points, Clint. I appreciate it, bud. Yeah, let me know. I'll try to join you again for one of your conversations there on your Friday night show.
Oh yeah, your internet was really killing you that one night.
Yeah, doing much better now. I got a better signal.
Oh yeah, that is
awesome.
Nice meeting you, Dan.
Dan the Wood Butcher.
Oh yeah.
All right, later, dude.
All right. Take it easy.
Dan, it's been a fun-filled conversation this evening. I appreciate you joining me here to get a little GCD.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any parting words outside of any diagnosis of the butchering of wood?
You know, I appreciate you enlightening me on some of these things I hear you talking about from time to time.
Yeah, for sure, man. Anytime.
It was just that, enlightening. I enjoyed hearing about some of these things and some of the, you know, coincidences.
You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Coincidences is, very loosely based understanding of, or very loosely connected definition of what's actually going on here. Because I honestly think somebody's got like a grand map and scale, you know, because folks, especially when you're running operations, you're running any sort of government function, and folks write stuff down. They're plotting things out on maps. They have coordinates and achievements and goals they're trying to hit, and they're putting this stuff. They're putting a peg up here, or, you know, writing something down on the board. You know, I honestly think a lot of these things do get kind of at least planned out in that regard. You know, I just don't see. I see it being far more closely related in an organized fashion to that than I do some sort of weird, universal kind of soup that's been formed in which all these elements come together and this rock counterculture pops off, right? Like this is just, you know, these examples with Grohl, pardon me, with Grohl and Stipe and all the connections that, you know, comparisons between the young Turks of the 60s and the younger Turks of the 90s, the children of the young Turks, or the Wrecking Crew, the studio band playing the actual music in the 60s, and the children of the musicians that are playing some of the music in the 90s on the studio albums for the grunge bands. I mean, it's going over and over and over. It's just, you know, it really makes me, you know, this framework has really caused me I like to call it the Dave McGowan kind of framework here, attributing it to his and his weird scenes. It's really opened my eyes and perspective to viewing a lot of different things with a very similar eye, applying the McGowan math, if you will, to different, not just rock music or movies, but other things, you know, geopolitic or sociopolitically speaking. But yeah, definitely. I mean, like, I still listen to Pearl Jam, but like, you know, I saw a hobo I sent you a quick video. I saw a hobo in a park yesterday who sounded almost like Lane Staley, enough like Lane Staley that I had to get up to make sure I wasn't hearing Alice in Chains on the radio. I was like, oh, it sounds like somebody singing. And I got up and looked, and it was definitely that hobo fella belting out some Alice in Chains, sounding just like Lane Staley. So I have an appreciation for the music still.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of one of those things, and you know, when Clint was talking there, kind of triggered in my head, made me think you just kind of have to separate the art from the artist.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, if I didn't do that, I'd never enjoy Tom Cruise playing a tall guy who knows how to fight on the big screen.
Right. Or, you know, people like even Bill Cosby, you know, one of the greatest comedians out there.
Ever.
Michael Jackson.
Oh, well, I mean, he's clearly not guilty, but I mean, I know what you mean. I understand.
I mean, the list goes on and on. You have to.
No, for sure.
Well,
absolutely. In fact, speaking of how I like to hate on Tom Cruise, I recently saw a movie with Ryan Gosling. Ryan Gosling called. It was a remake of the Fall Guy story from the '80s, the sitcom. But when I say a remake, it loosely remake, like loose definition of remake, because it was remaking kind of name only and kind of concept only, even though Lee Majors makes an appearance, the original Fall Guy, right, from the TV show.
Yeah.
It's clearly a parody on Tom Cruise. Like, it's clearly a parody on Tom Cruise's. I mean, it's kind of a spoiler alert, but it's clearly a parody on Tom Cruise's stunt guy. That's who Ryan Gosling's playing clearly in the movie, and because he's playing this stunt guy for this huge action star who produces all of his own movies along with his female producer partner. That's Tom Cruise's story. Like, that's literally what Tom Cruise did. Like, he had all of his Mission Impossible movies and stuff. That's with this one lady. And like, I think it's hilarious because after watching that movie, speaking of how ideas get populated by film and media and whatnot, I'm convinced after watching that film that Tom Cruise has murdered somebody, and they've secretly hid that murder on the set, of one of these films he's made, and that's depicted in this film, The Fall Guy, just because that's what the narrative is. They're framing the stunt man for a murder, an inadvertent murder on the scene by the Tom Cruise-like character, right? I'm like, oh shit, Tom Cruise and his producer buddy have clearly murdered people and just hit it now. I'm convinced of it.
I don't doubt that. I firmly believe Tom Cruise will be the first public immortal human being.
Well, I know Xenu would be thankful that you make that statement. His galactic overlord, alien boss. You're definitely appeasing the alien overlords with that statement, Dan.
Right.
And I appreciate that because, I mean, if he's right, I don't want to get destroyed by the aliens. You know what I mean?
That's fact.
The off chance that the alien psychos have taken over, or psychiatrists, I think that's his view. I think all the aliens are psychiatrists, and that's what Scientology believes. They're going to come and prison people in the already prison planet. If you start putting their philosophies under a microscope, it's not going to make any sense. But I mean,
well,
he plays a great tall guy who knows how to fight. I mean, I'll give him that much.
Yeah, he does. He's got some resources.
Yeah. All right, Dan, you got any more parting words for us here?
I think I'm good. You coming out tomorrow night?
Well, I'll come. Yeah, I'll come out. You got a stand-up comedy show, right?
Yeah, Springfield.
Yep, I'll be there.
Anybody's in that area?
Yeah, you said it's with the stage in Springfield.
The State Theater.
Oh, the state stage theater.
Yeah,
got that wrong.
Yeah.
I was calling it the State Theater.
Yeah, State Theater. It's a nice joint. It's a kind of a historic building in the area, and they've kept it
nice.
Well original.
Looks like you're on the lineup with a couple other comedians. Is there any certain theme It's just everyone's got a little bit different situation going on.
Yeah, it's just some funny individuals. Jesse Nutt's on there. He's been doing comedy for upwards of 40 years. I mean, that man is the OGs of the local comedy scene. He's been
nice
doing it.
No, I'll definitely be there, man. I'll definitely come check it out.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
All right, man. I'll see you.
All right, Dan. Well, folks of the interwebs, thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Dan, thank you for joining me to get a little GCD, and talk to you later, bud.
Later on.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, well, check your six. Look in that garbage can, because you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.